This is the first public outing of my practice as research, research as practice. We can argue over the terminology. My research is looking at the representation of animals in opera and contemporary music theater. You'll struggle to find the operatic, I think, in the experience you're about to have. It says performance, but in fact it's experiential. As I was trialing this piece, I realized that it was the experience of the performer that was more interesting, I think, and more compelling than just the experience of the audience. This is the first piece of what I call the Ensiferan variations. My practice is quite specifically looking at arthropods and insects in music and music theater. The Ensiferans are the long-horned grasshoppers. They're natural music makers. And one of the things that I wanted to do with this piece and the rest of the set of pieces is to see how I can get performers to imitate the natural music-making behaviors of katydids and crickets. So, yeah, of course. So what we've got, in fact, is looking at the first of these behaviors, which is mate finding, a common, in fact, probably the most essential use of music among arthropods. Some of the preoccupations I have here, authenticity and trying to be as close to what we know objectively about insects as possible. So I'm constantly referring back to scientists, to entomologists, if I've got questions about what to do next. I've never trialed this with people before, so I'm very curious to see how long this takes, etc. I I guess it's typical. Composers always write sets of instructions, even if we write them as scores with notation. But what I've got here are a set of instructions for you as audience performers as you travel around the space. A big question that I have, and something that comes up every time I talk about my work, I like to know beforehand what I'm doing and what I'm experiencing. I look at the plaque on the wall first and then look at the art. Lots of people don't like this. And since this is limited to 7 to 9 people, I thought this would be a good opportunity to see and compare the difference of experiences. So what I thought, we can do one run of this for 7 to 9 of you who like to have an unprejudiced experience of cricket communication. Then we'll all collect again and I'll explain what we're doing and why. And then another group of 9 can go in and experience it with that, with all the entomological information basically that goes along with it. Other than that, most of the things in there are relatively robust. Don't worry if you kick something and you hear some gaffer tape go, it's not a big deal, we can stick it back up. If you've got any questions, particularly about your instructions, I've tried to be very careful, but I know very often reading something, it doesn't necessarily make sense. What you're basically going to be doing is taking on the roles of crickets or predators in this space. You will either be a female who has a special treasure. You might be a male who has the key to that treasure. Or you may be a predator. Each of these 3 roles have quite specific behaviors that go with them. It's been a real challenge to try to create a set of instructions that people can come to untrained. Oh, I can see the look. Oh my God. If you'd like to go in and just see what's going on in their space, that's all right as well. And also feel free to take photographs or video. I'll give you my email because if we're documenting, we might as well document comprehensively. There are a few other strictures that don't occur on this that I might suggest. One of them, you want to spread out a little bit throughout the space. Remember that there are predators around. You don't want to be too obvious. So rather than making the call with your full voice, I recommend that you whisper. What you really have to do is make the sound of your cricket, for example, it's like some Kurt Schwitters here. You make that sound. If you hear that sound, you might respond, if you're the female, chip chip, to say, I am here, which is exactly what crickets do in the wild. Quietly, slowly, furtively, avoiding predators, keep making your sound, be careful. When you can hear your conspecific, the other person of your species, making the sound as you see, creep a little bit more close. And when you finally come into contact, then you can see if you've identified your partner correctly, if the key works. There are some instructions inside the box as well, once you open them. So there's your object. The boxes are a little bit ad hoc because I'm going to have to eviscerate them later. Actually, curiously, entomologists also have to eviscerate katydids when they pin them because their intestines are so large. So I'm sure there's a connection there. So really, I guess I just need 9 volunteers who fancy being the first people possibly in the world to
Not
Yes.
volunteer as such, but to ask a question.
Yes, of course.
Is there like one partner for each tune, as it were, or
I'm going to explain all of the setup in the afterwards because I don't want to prejudice you. I've engineered this. It's somewhere between contemporary music and a very elaborate game of hide and seek. I guess we just need 9 volunteers. Oh, there we go. Oh, let me also make sure I'm giving you the right instructions here. Yeah. Is that 8? Wait, before you go in. Well, I mean, to be honest, all I would recommend is that you take a little bit of time to look around at the space and spread yourself out a little bit. Don't share the information on your card. You're crickets now, it's non-linguistic. One more? Lovely. Well, here we go, yes. So, if you just, where Kirk is, just go on through, have a nose round. If you've got any questions about your instructions, obviously, let me know. For those of us who are here, if we want to just what you're hearing, this is the creature you've been hunting. And that's... Oh, yes. So... I'm the male who gets no mate. So that answers your question, Nick. Yeah, I'm the sucker here. Has everyone found their mate?
No.
Oh, yes, you ate me instead. Brilliant. Oh, thanks for that. Let's go outside and I'll explain to you what you've been doing and where all this came from. Oh, fantastic. Yes, they're all labeled on the back, so well, yes, as I said, it's an experiment. I call these the Enciferant variations a series of experiments in cricket music making. My original intention was to create a cricket chorus for singers and teach them, how to make these sounds. But for me, the most exciting thing is behaving like a cricket for a while. And in fact, the information that we've got about how these crickets are behaving, or specifically katydids, is from the contemporary entomological literature. The sounds that you were making and those transcriptions are actually transcriptions by early 20th century entomologists designed to be used to identify these organisms. So the zip is actually the transcription of Scudder, probably the most important singing insect guy from the beginning of the 20th century, in his key for the singing insects of Michigan. And some of you will have noticed some of these species, two of these species, have a genus named after Scudder. For me, the idea of being as faithful as possible to the science is very important. I did cheat a little bit. I used a transcription for one species and then a recording that sounded more like that transcription than the actual insect. So clearly there are some problems about authenticity and realness here. The other way I thought of doing this is to have everyone in a forest running around playing hide and seek, but with this lovely white space, we thought a good monochrome outing might do it. So for those of you who have taken part, any questions, concerns, reactions? I'm curious to build on this for the next iteration, so yes, yeah.
So I didn't know what predator to listen out and look out for, so...
Yes, I mean, this is one of the biggest problems that I've got in trying to create these experiences, where you have to give people enough freedom to do things, but at the same time you're trying to get them to do exactly what you want. My eye tends to be on the larger dramaturgy, but for you as a predator, what I'm really trying to do is prevent people going into the space, shouting out, tick, 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 zip, and then having someone come, oh yeah, zip, zip, that's me, let's go. So some of this experience of furtiveness and slowness and secrecy and danger, I think, the predators are there to make that danger real. Were you a predator, I assume, this time round?
No, that was nicely for the cricket, but I presume that the crickets predators sounds like, isn't it?
Yes, in fact, there are two main kinds of predators for crickets. The predators that I have you behaving here are toads, what are called sit-and-wait or ambush predators, which is why the instructions ask you to find a place, not move around too much, and wait for the prey to pass you. The other major prey for katydids are bats. So an instruction to swoop down upon your prey, I thought was unrealistic. Maybe for the next one, we've got a fly system in. Yeah.
Paintball.
Oh, yes. Oh yeah, Tom.
What senses that these crickets, what senses do they use? Because one of the things that I did was look for somebody carrying a box.
Oh, yes.
And is that something that crickets would do?
No, I mean, you don't know how happy I am that people are asking questions about crickets. I think this is probably the ultimate goal. No, crickets and katydids generally navigate only by sound, and they'll identify each other actually from very large distances. Again, it's another asking you to whisper is sort of imitating the fact that really you're trying to communicate with a katydid who might be half a kilometer away. But yeah, I mean, of course, maybe for the next one, hide your identity, hide your key. Any other react? Oh yes, yeah.
Are there any other naturally occurring dangers for crickets other than toads or bats?
Other ground-dwelling predators, birds, but bats are actually their most important predator. In fact, some katydids have developed a way of singing that interferes with the echolocation of bats. So there's a kind of evolutionary arms race going on. Mate finding is one thing that they do, and that's kind of what this experiment is around. Perhaps a predator evasion.
Just talking about the general landscape.
Oh yes. Well, I mean the other thing. Again, you're finding all the holes in this. Where trying to translate the science into an experience and a performance comes in. Katydids are mostly tree-dwelling, and would tend to flap from one tree to the next. They won't tend to crawl on the ground. So, yeah, if anyone wants to flap around for the next one, this is also...
So why are they so specific about one mate? Just on the note of crickets, why are they specific for one mate? Why can't we just say, you will do it, let's do it?
Oh, well, they are, in fact, whichever one will do. Although they have their own ways of deciding fitness, of course. But what we're really looking for is within the clamour of all these different cricket noises to find the mate who is of your own species, which is why I've put locks and keys in. So if you do identify, you just happen to find another female, if it's not the right species, then yeah, there's nothing to be gained.
If you go to, say, France, you're completely bombarded with the noise. So you think there should be too much of a problem finding a mate?
Yes, the other thing that we tend to think that this is all one species. The other interesting thing that's happening is that a lot of the variation between these cricket calls is inaudible to humans. And it's another thing that really interests me about the way insects make music and the way they respond to sound, is they're really responding to things which are totally beyond what we are capable of doing. One of the things I'm constantly coming up in front of in terms of finding animal authenticity is the fact that we don't know what animals think. And we can't really make sounds like crickets. So there is an acknowledgement that needs to be made at the very beginning that there are, adaptations that need to be made, cheats, depending on how you see it. But again, for me, it's the stepping into the role of a cricket and trying to experience it from that direction. That's most interesting to me. The other bit of cricket behaviour that I was trying to imitate, there's a thing that these crickets specifically do that I call nuptial gift giving. It's a little bit gross. What the male does, he secretes a sort of oily protein out of his neck. So when the female comes to mate, she munches on the protein to keep her occupied. I couldn't find anywhere in the scientific literature a recipe for this or anything that says what the constituents were. My original hope was that you could open a box and have a big thing of cricket gloop. But yeah, your reactions to that make it clear about that. Any other, like, for the, oh yes, please.
I found it really enjoyable just listening and at the same time what you've been saying kind of covers a question which is normally there would be all this interference that you hear in the wild, and I'm wondering if it, because we're so keenly tuning in our very gross non-cricket way, whether some kind of noise, some kind of white noise or background noise or something that would, because I really like the whiteness of the space, I like the symbolism of the space, but just as you've got visual symbolism in the space, then you might also have a kind of a sonic symbolism with a layering of gritty noise.
Yeah, it's funny, it's something I was considering, and then the real question was what noise to bring in. Obviously real cricket sounds are out. The other exercise here is that it's an exercise in specifically listening.
Yeah.
And I think my hope was, it wasn't quite as noisy as I'd hoped, so maybe in the next iteration we could be a little bit more free in the way we cricket call. But yeah, I mean, this started out really as an exploration of what happens when you get a chorus making these sounds. So for me as a composer, the interest is the sound that's being made. I guess for a participant, maybe adding that interference is something more useful.
I mean, I can understand why you did what you did, because we were trying to keep our levels to a reasonable sort of range. But it seems to me that while we're focusing on the keenness of these sounds, we're wanting to try to discern them from an ambient sound that is much stronger.
Yes.
So I guess the interference just could be more participants. Because I felt like there was loads of, so if it was like pure noise at the beginning, and then gradually as people meet each other, then it gradually becomes sound, doesn't it? So it's that volume of people.
Yes. Yeah, so maybe for the next one, don't whisper quite so quietly. We can, non-vocal. I mean, a non-vocal sound. The other reason I chose a whisper, of course, in opera theory and talk about the voice, the idea of breath and voice is extremely important. And I think this is something that crickets are missing. Of course, katydids stridulate by rubbing their hind wing, running their wings together behind them. As soon as we start using our voices, I feel like we humanize this process a little bit too much. So lots of I do this very well because I spent my time doing this. Yeah.
Why is it for voice then? Why is it for voice then? Sorry to be...
Oh, yes.
I mean, presumably you could fashion some kind of really good instrument and have people...
She's great.
They feel less shy.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, shyness is a difficulty. I think probably the most important difficulty in all of this. There are other insects that I'm approaching through building instruments. I'll be making cicada instruments next year. I want people to do it, to be making the sound. I mean, the other consideration I had was to see if we can get people to stridulate in some sort of way. But the other concern I had here, and another abiding preoccupation, was this problem in transcription and the way moving from cricket language to human language, so much is lost. And then again, moving from the sound of a cricket to these cheap electronics inside the box, again, something is lost. So always in this process, we come up against these seemingly insuperable barriers between what we do and how we live, and what crickets do and how crickets live. And I think my main hope in all of this is to give people, well, perhaps, you know, to go out and listen a little bit more to the crickets that are around, I mean, in a kind of soft nature lover way, but also just the idea of considering that, what that gap is, and whether, in fact, the, you know, what's called the irresistible taboo of anthropomorphism, to say that they're so different, we have nothing in common, there's no way we can understand their experience, that's a barrier that I'd like to break down with pieces like this. So, it's, yeah, I mean, some way a hide-and-seek game, some way a piece of contemporary choral music, and also in some ways a science exhibit, you know, something that might belong in a museum as much as in a space like this. Yes.
Presumably, one of the sort of things that leads to the vocalising is the nature of the transcription. I haven't seen one, but I mean the nature of the transcription which seems to sort of translate into that form.
Yes.
Are there other transcriptions?
I've specifically chosen those with the fewest vowels. I've also tried to choose ones that are slightly different from one another. I mean, there are a lot of where there's one spelled B-Z-R-W-I with a curved accent over the top of it. Good luck. And then there are others where they just say gra, 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 or ru, ru, ru. So I've chosen ones that first do kind of evoke the real sound of the katydid. And yes, also ones that aren't going to be too
The
vocal.
guy who transcribed, do you think he was hearing vocal transcription? I mean, vocalizations when he wrote those?
This is hard to tell. I think that you could do a linguistic study of this. It's curious that what we often find are really a set of stops, a ch-ch-ch or ch-ch-ch, and then a set of fricatives like zzz, brr, brr. And the real cricket sounds do have a single stridulum, which, or the, which is from repeating. Human alphabets are even less robust in these translations than actual, you know, human sounds. I mean, we can make all kinds of sounds that we can't write down. So again, there's another block, you know, another weakness in this problem of transcription. I didn't, for reasons of scientific purity, dare I say, I avoided the work of a guy called Ossian Nilsson, who worked with much smaller insects. Amazing stuff. He was also a violinist, and so he would transcribe things musically and would give sometimes performance instructions. So it sounds like a violin bowed very hard Ponticello, for example.
Have people tried playing those on a violin?
That's coming up next, you can be sure. Yeah.
One last question from Paul.
Oh, yes, yeah.
It sounds like you need to do your own transcriptions.
Yes, yes. I think
Update them.
one of the problems is that England's insect fauna is actually not very rich. I've seen one katydid in this country. I will be going to a national park in Poland this summer, which is the last remaining big wilderness in Europe, to make some recordings. And yeah, I think that might be a good way to do it. Again, this is an iteration for non-specialist performers, but ultimately this is going to be incorporated into a work for a trained chorus. So it's more about a presentation to the audience than it is, you know, this experiential thing. So.
If the people that now engage with the space could do so now, then
Yes, yeah.
and then we set up for sitting up to Stoke.
Perfect. Thanks.